West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Congressman, when I start with you, first on the news that's broken just this afternoon that Congressman Loudermilk, of all members of the body, will conduct an investigation of the investigation. Your reaction?
Well, I mean, Barry is a member of the House Administration Committee, but it's an unfortunate choice. The committee did ask him to explain why he was giving a tour to somebody who showed up on the 5th of January, who showed up the next day at the Capitol threatening the life of Speaker Pelosi. And, this guy was taking pictures of the tunnels from the Rayburn building into the Capitol. He was taking pictures of stairwells and hallways, not usual tourist spots. And, we didn't accuse Loudermilk of anything. We just wanted to explain, how did this happen? And he refused to do that. I'd still like to know how he ended up doing that. Maybe he'll explain it.
Tim Hafey, do you think that is what is going on here? That he's interested in explaining anything about this tour that he gave? It's again, I know we're in this moment where what we see with our own eyes is being called into question, but we can see with our own eyes that a normal, we've all been on tours, right? This is not a normal tour when you're filming stairwells and doorways.
Yeah, exactly. As Ms. Lofgren said, we developed evidence that Representative Loudermilk himself was escorting some constituents, but some add-ons. This person taking pictures had just met the constituents on a bus the day before and was taking pictures of stairwells and of tunnels. They didn't go to the Capitol, to be clear. It wasn't a tour of the Capitol. It was in the House office building, but it was on the day before the riot, and it was a time when the building was not open to the public. So anyone who came in had to be escorted in by a member of Congress. And look, we had a lot of questions for Representative Loudermilk and other members of Congress. We wrote them letters. We ultimately issued some subpoenas, and no one came to tell us of their perspective. We were very open-minded and wanted every relevant fact, not just about Representative Loudermilk and his escorted group on January 5th, but lots of activity of members of Congress. And rather than cooperate in the process, people blew us off. So I do find it ironic that now there's an investigation being led by people that were refused to provide relevant information when it was sought by the committee.
Luke, how much of this is because Jim Jordan bombed?
Well, I think that Kevin McCarthy has wanted to do this investigation for a while. If you recall, he did send a records preservation letter some months ago, and he has been talking with Barry Loudermilk about conducting it. They feel personally aggrieved by the January 6th committee. Barry Loudermilk thinks he was smeared, and he is, I mean, really, the strategy of this is to try to get back at the investigators who investigated
smear Congresswoman Lofgren and Tim Hafey.
So they're going to go through all these documents. They're going to, I guess, see what they can find. This is all under the auspices of protecting the Capitol, and when I would guess they will likely allege that security failures were covered up by the January 6th committee. But that seems to be the type of inquiry or the lane they're going down with their inquiry.
And Loudermilk is just part of. I mean, I guess at some level it's funny, but it's just part of he was aggrieved the way Kevin McCarthy feels aggrieved because this indisputable evidence of people he led around the House office building, what hurt his feelings, made him, why Loudermilk?
They think that he was painted as an insurrectionist, and he claims he's not. Kevin McCarthy, he feels personally aggrieved by the January 6th committee as well. So a lot of this, I think, is quite personal. It has, if you were looking from a strategic political lens, this would not be the move you would do, right? I mean, it would,
that's what I'm getting at. I mean, this is ludicrous.
To make January 6th once again the focus of the country, when that day was so bad for your party, and you want everyone to focus on this again and again. I would think if you're Mitch McConnell or one of the Senate Republicans who's trying to take back the Senate, this is the last thing in the world you'd want to talk about. So, we'll see how this pans out and how this strategy works.
I mean, Congresswoman, to Luke's point, I mean, wouldn't you call Mitch McConnell, who yesterday associated himself with the Capitol Police's assessment of January 6th? I mean, you really have over here on Earth One, where we reside, and all Democrats, all independents, journalists outside of Fox News, and many Republicans, it would appear, including Mitch McConnell, associate themselves with the Capitol Police assessment of that day, that it was not sightseeing. And it would appear that if Loudermilk thought it was just sightseeing, why would he be aggrieved?
I don't get it. And I mean, we didn't accuse him of anything. We just wanted to find out why this rioter ended up with him taking pictures of the tunnel between the office building and the Capitol and other stairwells and the like, and he wouldn't answer. But it wasn't just that. I mean, we tried to get to the bottom of a lot of information. We asked first for our colleagues to come in and talk to us, and when they refused to respond, in some cases we subpoenaed them and they just blew it off. So I guess, a subpoena to a member of Congress is a mere request or suggestion. I guess that's their position. I don't see how they can try and pretend that January 6th was anything other than what it was, a riot. People died. There was an effort really led by the ex-president to overturn the election, to seize power illegally. How they are going to try and paint that as something else, good luck.
I mean, Tim Havey, this brings us back to what is a conspiracy to rewrite the day. I'm not suggesting a criminal one, but Kevin McCarthy, whose patron political saint is Donald Trump, has bequeathed 41,000 hours of security footage to Tucker Carlson. It's a closed circuit. What is your view? I mean, in Tucker's mission, what he has said on his air is that it was nothing more than sightseeing, which is like saying a bar is nothing more than nachos or the Super Bowl is nothing more than beer. I mean, there might have been a couple of sightseers, but it was a deadly insurrection. So said all the Republicans and Fox News hosts in their private text to Mark Meadows in one way or another. I mean, what do you think is going on?
The president's son said the same thing. To say, really, what bothers me at so many levels that they're trying to lie about this, but the Capitol Police, they took a tremendous beating. And I've talked to many of these officers. They were injured. The officer, the woman who testified, the officer covered in the blood on the west steps of the Capitol, and to diminish their brave service is just really disgusting. And I'll tell you another thing that really bothered me was to diminish the death of Officer Sicknick. I mean, he was injured terribly during the fight to keep the mob out of the Capitol, and he died the next day. And to diminish that is just a disgrace. I just don't see how they can look in the mirror.
Tim Hafey, your thoughts on both the decision to recast the insurrection in ways that are at odds with what Republicans saw and said out loud that day?
Yeah, so 2 points, Nicole. One, we thought it was really important to release everything. Right? This narrative, going back to the investigation of the investigation, that there was anything hidden is just ludicrous. So we wrote a report that's 845 pages long. We held hearings, which presented a subset of the evidence gathered by the committee. But then we released everything. So every person to whom we spoke in a transcribed interview or in a deposition, that transcript is available. So Chief Sund and General Walker and line men and women who valiantly, as Ms. Lofgren said, defended the Capitol, all of that is part of the record. So to suggest that there was some kind of misleading impression given, look, we showed our work. We didn't just give you the sum of the equation. We showed you the worksheet that informed that conclusion. And I'm glad we did. Ms. Lofgren was one of the voices arguing correctly that all of this should be made part of the historical record so that we can learn from it. Now, what Tucker Carlson is doing is picking and choosing bits and pieces of Capitol Police surveillance footage and creating false narratives. The Officer Sicknick example is a great example that Ms. Lofgren was just talking about, right? Officer Sicknick, after he was pepper sprayed, continued to engage with rioters, continued to try to de-escalate the situation, continued to try to disperse crowds from the crypt. He then died the next day of natural causes that was informed by the stress and the experience that he suffered on January 6th. That's the opinion of the medical examiner, a doctor, whose view, frankly, I trust more than Tucker Carlson's or any of us. There were a lot of officers that, while injured, continued to do their duty. Caroline Edwards, one of our witnesses, was concussed, knocked over at the Peace Circle, then pepper sprayed. She was standing right next to Brian Sicknick. Yet she persisted. She continued to defend the Capitol and Representative Loudermilk and everyone whose lives were at stake because of this attack on the Capitol. And to suggest that the January 6th committee is somehow spinning some false narrative that Officer Sicknick was a victim is offensive, because Officer Sicknick and lots of others bravely fought and suffered ultimate consequences as a result.
It is Thursday, the 9th of March of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Metro's Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya. A little bit of spice in your life. Just a little. Okay, well, I thought that was an illuminating beginning of things that we really already know, but we need to be reminded because of the constant gaslighting by you-know-who. A group called the GOP. GOP. All right. Boy, it's nonstop, too. Their social media people just keep saying the same lies over and over and over. Joe is the reason for, inflation. Joe is the reason for fentanyl at the border. Joe is the reason for meteors falling out of the sky and hitting whatever. Joe is the reason for all of it. And the radical socialists laughed. All right. I keep telling everybody that only a Nazi thinks that Eisenhower policies are commie. Not virtual Nazis. They were the only ones. And now their progeny walk among us. Okay. I had some people tell me they hadn't heard the term Bircher in a long time, and I'm thinking, where you been? We've been talking about it like big time since at least GW. I remember back then people were saying, wow, Bircher, I haven't heard that in a long time. Oh, I don't know. We've been talking about it since Reagan. Then when Reagan was around, I got the same thing. Boy, Bircher, I haven't heard that for like about 5 years. Wow, we never stopped talking about it. What are you talking about? Okay. So I guess that's how history has changed. It's only what we are able to remember. And when we stop remembering it, then other people remember it for us. And you know where that could lead. That's right. Now, I need to inform folks there is a way to, I'm just speaking metaphorically, but you can divine the truth about events by coming at them or at an event from 3 different points of view. Try it. It's called triangulation. And you do that in multiples of 3s, and at some point you're able to say with, good confidence that this is how it happened. And that is how history is done, in the professional way, rather than just like, oh, well, I read a book. Well, good. We're all reading books. That's good. But maybe they need to be respected books too, and then that's where we have a problem, isn't it? Because then you can get somebody like Rufo, who, see, this is what they do. They have no interest in the Enlightenment. Give me a break. Classical Western education, they have no interest in that. They go, oh, we have to get back to the Western tradition. Well, really? Because the Western tradition encompasses more than just the Western tradition. That's why it's the Western tradition. People keep forgetting that. So they come in under these auspices of, I got to tell you, professors of the classics sometimes like to hear that. Well, we're a forgotten scholarship. No one cares about the classics anymore. Plutarch? Who knows Plutarch? So, it's like, oh, wow, we're going to get to read Plutarch again. And so then you get some Plutarch, and it's like going to the mission for a free meal. First, you got to listen to their goddamn indoctrination before you can get the meal. And in some cases, you have to confess your sins. Thanks. So this is kind of like what this Rufo guy is doing, You want some of this? Well, there's a price to pay. Give me your soul. Okay. I don't care to do that or have it done to anybody. It shouldn't be. Especially when we're speaking about academic freedom. Oh, we get to review tenured professors at our will. Give me a break. All right. On the other hand, there are reviews of professors who go off the rails, and I'm sorry that the ones that go off the rails tend to be the fascist kind. I don't see very many classical scholars of Mary Shelley, for instance, getting mad at their compatriots because of some slight. But I'd stay away from the engineering departments. Yeah, you never know. Those guys go off a lot. Well, we have some actually quite longer reads today if we choose to read them in close to their entirety. So why don't we go ahead and give you a rundown on what we have in store for you here in this salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, as we begin in the Bistro Cafe of such. The Justice Department issued a blistering report of an extensive federal investigation into the Louisville Metro Police Department. The one that killed Breonna Taylor. Yeah. Hackers may have gained access to the sensitive personal data of House and Senate members, their employees, and families in a breach of a Washington, D.C. health insurance marketplace. Which one could that be? And UC Berkeley has failed to return the remains of thousands of Native Americans to California tribes, and the university is still discovering more ancestral remains. I've been doing this for decades. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where women are enlisting in Colombia's army for the first time in 25 years. And leading women's rights campaigners criticized male-dominated governments for excluding women from peace negotiations. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Page at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. Across the page to the left from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio and possibly send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send those funds to us once a month, that would really help us pay our bills and all the other attendant costs in keeping this powerhouse of resistance up and resisting as we have been. Yes, we have an anniversary coming up in just a couple of days. In fact, it might even be tomorrow. I gotta look. It's been so long. Tom reminded me of it. So, oh yeah, wow, we're a dozen years old now. Jeez. Okay, well, we have you to thank for allowing us to have that longevity, and we appreciate your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, please do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that and a hell of a lot more. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I incidentally post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime. And then I get that linked up on social media. And that's where you can find the actual articles that we are drawing from in the salon of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Please follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Indeed. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes from the Washington Post by Mark Berman, who brings us 7 highlights from the Justice Department's blistering Louisville police probe. The Justice Department yesterday, Wednesday, released the findings of an extensive federal investigation into the Louisville Metro Police Department, concluding that the department has a pattern of violating the Constitution and using excessive force. In an 86-page report, the Justice Department painted a dire picture of the Louisville police, recounting examples of officers being unnecessarily violent, using racist rhetoric, and failing to properly investigate sexual and domestic violence. And here are 7 findings from the report. Now, number 1, the report describes Louisville police officers as repeatedly acting unnecessarily violent and lashing out for no legitimate reason. Officers use force simply because people do not immediately follow their orders, even when those people are not physically resisting officers or posing a threat to anyone, the report said. That includes cases of officers unconstitutionally using force just to inflict punishment or to retaliate against those challenging their authority. Number 2, Louisville police unnecessarily escalate encounters, and the report describes Louisville police officers as acting rashly and improperly, saying they unnecessarily escalate encounters and routinely rush into encounters without adequately weighing the threat or resistance presented by the individual involved. Rather than trying to de-escalate the situation, the report said, officers will engage in escalating behavior that can startle or anger the people involved. That often leads officers to use force that is unwarranted or disproportionate. Nearly a quarter of uses of force reviewed by the Justice Department involved people in the midst of a crisis, the report said, and a large share of those incidents involved at least one unreasonable use of force. Number 3, the Louisville Police's issues with using force are due in part to poor oversight, the report said, calling investigations into use of force perfunctory. Supervisors make little effort to actually probe what happened, the Federal Review said, and in their report sometimes mischaracterize or omit facts that would undermine a conclusion that force was justified. Louisville police investigations into shootings by officers are routinely deficient, the report said, including cases where investigators would ask leading questions during interviews, at times suggesting possible justifications for the officer's use of force. Number 4, the report bluntly said the Louisville police force unlawfully discriminates against black people in its enforcement activities and carries out racially disparate enforcement that harms black people. Black people in Louisville, the report said, disproportionately bear the burden of the police department's actions, including use of force, unreasonable uses of force, and improper stops. The Justice Department said that the police force's own data shows racial disparities in its enforcement activities, but the Federal Review said that data probably understates the scope of the issue because the Louisville Police Department has failed to document thousands of police encounters in black neighborhoods. Number 5. The report also highlights examples of bigoted commentary and behavior among Louisville police officers. In 2015, the report said a white sergeant berating 3 black men in a car called them effing monkeys. The sergeant was investigated by the police department for discourtesy and conduct unbecoming rather than bias or prejudice, and retired before facing looming discipline. In another case, a white officer called a black man boy after the man ran from police and allegedly dropped a gun. Officers chased the man, then tackled, hit, and handcuffed him, the report said. An officer told the bleeding man he was acting like a thug and inveighed against the problem with this community. The report said that supervisors found the officers' use of force justified and added that they were verbally counseled for vulgar language in the heat of the moment. Number 6. The report faulted the police for how the department responded to the unrest that erupted in the summer of 2020. The findings in this section echo what other reviews have found, with after-action reports criticizing some police departments that responded to those protests as unprepared and saying they improperly used use of force. In Louisville, where protests were driven by Breonna Taylor's death earlier that year, police sometimes used force, including riot sticks and chemical agents, against demonstrators who did more than passively resist or disperse more slowly than officers desired, the report said. Officers at times fired less lethal rounds at moving vehicles, shattering glass and endangering people in the area. Police made improper arrests during the demonstrations, and journalists also faced mass arrests and retaliatory force. Number 7. The Justice Department was sharply critical of how the Louisville police respond to reports of sexual assault and domestic violence, including cases of its own officers. While the report said the Justice Department did not conclude that these behaviors result in gender bias in violation of federal law, it does say investigators believe that such bias might be interfering with how the Louisville police handle these issues. According to the report, the department falls woefully short at investigating reports of domestic violence and sexual misconduct by officers. In some cases, the Justice Department said, the Louisville police carried out administrative investigations but failed to address significant issues, including reports that officers tried to intimidate or retaliate against the women making the allegations. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Members of the House and Senate were informed yesterday, Wednesday, that hackers may have gained access to their sensitive personal data in a breach of a Washington, D.C. health insurance marketplace. Employees of the lawmakers and their families were also affected. D.C. HealthLink confirmed that data on an unspecified number of customers was affected and said it was notifying them and working with law enforcement. It said it was offering identity theft service to those affected and extending credit monitoring to all customers. The FBI said it was aware of the incident and was assisting the investigation. A broker in an online crime forum claimed to have records on 170,000 DC HealthLink customers and was offering them for sale for an unspecified amount. The broker claimed they were stolen on Monday. Reached by the AP on an encrypted chat site, the broker did not say whether the data had been purchased and said they could not provide additional data to back the claim. They said they were acting on behalf of the seller, who they identified as the Killub. Sample stolen data was posted on the site for a dozen apparent customers. It included Social Security numbers, addresses, names of employers, phone numbers, email, and addresses. The AP reached one of the dozen by dialing a listed number. "Oh my God," the man said when informed the information was public. "All 12 people listed work for the same company or are family members." In an email to all Senate email account holders, the sergeant-at-arms said it was informed that the stolen data included full names of the insured and family members. An email sent out by the Office of the Chief Administrative Office of the House on behalf of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries called the breach egregious and promised to provide updates. It urged members to use credit and identity theft monitoring resources. The Senate email recommended that anyone registered on the health insurance exchange freeze their credit to prevent identity theft. In an emailed statement, Representative Joe Morrell of New York said House leadership was informed by Capitol Police that DC HealthLink suffered an extraordinarily large data breach of enrollee information that posed a great risk to members, employees, and their family members. At this time, the cause, size, and scope of the data breach impacting the DC HealthLink still needs to be determined by the FBI, Morrell said. The hack follows several recent breaches affecting U.S. agencies. Hackers broke into a U.S. Marshals Service computer system and activated ransomware on February 17th. After stealing personally identifiable data about agency employees and targets of investigations. An FBI computer system was recently breached at the Bureau's New York field office. Asked about that intrusion, the FBI issued a statement calling it an isolated incident that has been contained. It declined further comment, including when it occurred and whether ransomware was involved. There was no indication that the health breach was ransomware related. Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of ProPublica by Mary Huditz and Graham Lee Brewer from NBC News. Despite decades of indigenous activism and resistance, UC Berkeley has failed to return the remains of thousands of Native Americans to tribes, and the university is still discovering more human remains. Famed professor Tim White, for decades, used a vast collection of those remains, bones sorted by body part and stored in wooden bins, to teach his anthropology students at the University of California, Berkeley. In the interest of fairness, I have been among those bins. White, a world-renowned expert on human evolution, said the collection was passed down through generations of anthropology professors before he started teaching with it in the late 70s. It came with no records, he said. Most were not labeled at all or said only lab. But that simple description masked a dark history. UC Berkeley administrators recently acknowledged that, and UC Berkeley conducted an analysis of the collection after White reported its contents in response to a university system-wide order in 2020 to search for human remains. Administrators disclosed to state officials in May that the analysis found the collection includes the remains of at least 95 people excavated from grave sites, most of them likely Native Americans from California, according to previously unreported documents obtained by ProPublica and NBC News. The university's disclosure was particularly painful because it involved a professor who many indigenous people already viewed as a primary antagonist, according to interviews with tribal members. UC Berkeley has long angered tribal nations with its handling of thousands of ancestral remains amassed during the university's century-long campaign of excavating indigenous burial grounds. More than 3 decades ago, Congress ordered museums, universities, and government agencies that receive federal funding to publicly report any human remains in their collections that they believe to be Native Americans and then return them to tribal nations. UC Berkeley has been slow to do so. The university estimates that it still holds the remains of 9,000 indigenous people in the campus's Phoebe A. Hearst Museum of Anthropology, more than any other U.S. institution bound by the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, according to a ProPublica analysis of federal data. That tally does not include the remains that White reported and relinquished in 2020. For decades, White served as an expert advisor on the university's repatriation decisions, sitting on committees that weighed whether to grant or deny tribes' requests. White said the collection did not need to be reported under the Act because there was no way to determine the origin of the bones, and therefore the law does not apply. The collection has exposed deep rifts at UC Berkeley, pitting a prominent professor who said he's done nothing wrong against university administrators who have apologized to tribes for not sharing information about the remains sooner. For tribes, the episode follows a familiar pattern at UC Berkeley's delays and failures to be transparent with them. This is a major moral, ethical, and potentially legal violation, said Laura Miranda, a member of the Pechanga Band of Indians and chair of the California Native American Heritage Commission. She made her comments at a July hearing held by the commission, which oversees the university system's handling of indigenous remains. UC Berkeley officials declined interview requests, saying tribes have asked us not to. In a statement, the university said White was no longer involved in repatriation decisions. There's now a moratorium on using ancestral remains for teaching or research purposes. And that's according to the statement. And the Hearst Museum is currently closed to the public so that staff can prioritize repatriation. The university also acknowledged that in the past, UC Berkeley had mishandled its repatriation responsibilities. The campus privileged some kinds of scientific and scholarly evidence over tribal interests and evidence provided by the tribes, the university said in a statement. In an interview with ProPublica and NBC News, White said he's been villainized for strictly adhering to the federal law, which he said requires balancing scientific proof with other evidence. In the years immediately after Congress passed the act, UC Berkeley relied on White's expertise as curator of the museum's skeletal collection to challenge indigenous peoples' repatriation requests, according to testimony before a federal advisory committee. Some members accused him of demanding too high a burden of scientific proof for repatriations and discounting knowledge passed down through the generations. In the 90s, he made headlines for fighting to use Native Americans as teaching tools, arguing that students should not be deprived of the opportunity to learn from them. He later sued to block the UC system from returning 2 sets of remains, estimated to date from 9,000 years ago, saying they were too old to be linked to any living descendants. Well. You can read the rest of the ProPublica article at the links provided, so please do. And now let us go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Arthritis is common among veterans. Traumatic and overuse injuries during active duty are risk factors for developing arthritis. Fortunately, there are low-cost or no-cost strategies that can help veterans manage arthritis. Physical activity can reduce pain and improve function. It can also help improve mood and play a role in managing other chronic conditions, such as heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. You can do low-impact activities, such as walking, biking, swimming, and water aerobics, all good forms of exercise. Arthritis-specific classes can help you get started. Information on classes, exercise programs, and tools are available at cdc.gov/arthritis. These resources can help reduce pain and improve function. Learning self-management techniques can help all veterans become more active, improve their overall quality of life, and thrive.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Wake up and text. Text and eat. Text and catch the bus. Text and miss your stop. Wait. Text and be late to work.
Sorry, I'm late.
Text and work. Text and pretend to work. Text and act surprised when someone calls you out for not working.
Who, me?
Text and meet up with a friend you haven't seen in forever.
Hi.
Oh, hey.
Text and complain that they're on their phone the whole time. Text and listen to them complain that you're on your phone the whole time. Text and whatever. But when you get behind the wheel, give your phone to a passenger. Put it in the glove box. Just don't text and drive. Visit StopTextsStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Ready for our little forest adventure?
Yes! So much waiting for me. Yeah, I wanna go outside. I wanna be.
We're here.
Whoa, that was fast.
There's a forest closer than you think. Find a park or forest near you and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by USDA Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Could much of the First Amendment soon be repealed? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. A 1964 Supreme Court case, New York Times versus Sullivan, allows you and the media to report on or criticize public figures without undue fear that you'll get sued for defamation. Sullivan holds that under the First Amendment, if you or a media outlet says something untrue about a public figure intentionally or with reckless disregard for whether it's true or not, the public figure can sue you. Fair enough. But otherwise, the speech is constitutionally protected. Good. Sullivan allows investigative reporters to investigate and voters to criticize elected officials. Without Sullivan, important speech will be chilled, which could happen. A proposed law in Florida is designed to reverse Sullivan. The proposal says, for example, that anonymous sources such as Watergate are presumptively false, and that a political person's private or business life is not part of their public person. The law is intended to shut down speech and reporting. It is also designed to go to the Supreme Court so that, proponents hope, Sullivan will be overruled. Keep careful watch on Florida. There's a legislative knife there, pointed at a vital artery of the First Amendment. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1911. That was the day that coal miners in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, walked out of the mines. It became known as the Slovak Strike because 70% of the strikers were Slovakian immigrants. Unrest was mounting among workers in the non-unionized coal fields. Tens of thousands of miners were signing up to be members of the United Mine Workers of America. And the union was winning improved working conditions and wages for their members, including the 8-hour day. But the Westmoreland miners were not unionized. They still had to work 10-hour days. Then the Keystone Coal Company required the miners to use new safety lights and explosives. The miners had to pay for these items out of their own pockets. Outraged, the miners met to formulate a response. 400 men joined up to a new UMWA local. The company cracked down immediately. They fired 100 men who had attended the meeting. Some were long-term employees who had worked for more than 2 decades in the mines. The miners walked off the job to protest the firings. Soon, the strike spread beyond the Keystone Coal Company. Miners joined the strike from 65 mines belonging to 30 companies. The mining companies responded with every tactic in their arsenals. They evicted the miners from their company homes. They won injunctions against picketing. They recruited recent immigrants from Eastern Europe as scabs. They paid off police who responded brutally to the strikers. 16 miners were killed. Although the strikers held out for 16 months, the strike ended in defeat, with many of the strikers being blacklisted from future work in the coal fields. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Still, we are under an airport weather warning, and that's a little bit different from our active winter advisory. A few showers early, becoming a steady rain in the afternoon with winds out of the east-southeast at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Rainfall around a 1/4 inch, and then evening rain followed by a mix of rain and snow overnight. Lows in the low 30s. Winds out of the southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and we're expecting an inch of precipitation overnight. And then rain and snow tapering off in the morning with decreasing cloudiness in the afternoon with highs in the low to mid-40s. Winds out of the west-southwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour, and we should have about a 1/4 inch of rain tomorrow. Pollen is still rated as none in the little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 27 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is in the moderate range and has now ticked up to level 4. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.89 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 90%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 51 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 57 and cloudy. Rome is 64 degrees and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 51 with light rain. Kabul is 50 degrees and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 70 and fair. Tokyo is 61 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 65 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 47 degrees and cloudy with a fog warning on the bay and offshore. And New York, New York is 46 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Alfred Suarez of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Dressed in camouflage, Zulma Stefania Perez reflected on her first weeks of training at a military base in the capital and on her life as one of Colombia's first female recruits in more than 2 decades. The physical drills we must endure are the same as for the men, she said. Being women doesn't make us less capable. In fact, there are many skills and strengths we have that men may not have. Perez, age 24, is part of a cohort of 1,296 women who enlisted in Colombia's army in February when the South American country opened military service to women for the first time in 25 years. Colombia has long had compulsory military service for men ages 18 to 24. The Army relies heavily on those young recruits to staff bases, protect infrastructure, and carry out administrative tasks, while its professional soldiers confront drug trafficking gangs and rebel groups. This year, officials allowed females in the same age range to voluntarily join the military in what the Army says is part of an effort to strengthen the role of women in its ranks. Recruits must live on military bases for several months and earn a monthly stipend of only about $75, but some of the women in the new program hope it helps them build a career in the armed forces. They see it as a chance for a stable job and educational opportunities. I like the lessons we get here about human rights and international humanitarian law because that's my field of expertise, said Perez, who has a law degree but has struggled to find work in the legal profession. She said that after her basic training, she will likely get a job in the military's Judicial Affairs Department. First, she must undergo 3 months of basic training, waking up each day at 6 a.m. and being given only 1 minute to take a cold shower. She has also learned to run while carrying a 6.5-pound rifle. The toughest thing has been to adapt to all of this exercise, she said. As a civilian, you live a sedentary lifestyle. Colombia's army has had around 200,000 soldiers. About 1% are women, who until now joined after attending military universities or applying for administrative jobs.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Edith M. Lederer of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. On the eve of International Women's Day, leading women's rights campaigners at the United Nations and the African Union and a Nobel Peace Laureate criticized male-dominated governments for excluding women from peace negotiations. They complain that governments are ignoring a UN resolution adopted in 2000 demanding equal participation for women in talks to end conflicts. Sima Bahous, head of the UN agency promoting gender equality, lamented the regression in women's rights. She told the Security Council that we have neither significantly changed the composition of peace tables, nor the impunity enjoined by those who commit atrocities against women and girls. Bahous, executive director of UN Women, called for a radical change of direction She said action should be taken to mandate the inclusion of women at every meeting and in every decision-making process, with consequences for noncompliance, and funds should be channeled to women's groups in conflict-affected areas where the money is most needed, she said. The Security Council was assessing the state of the resolution it adopted on October 31st of 2000 that stresses the importance of role of women in preventing and resolving conflicts and demands their equal participation in all efforts to promote peace and security. It also calls on all parties to conflicts to protect women and girls from gender-based violence, especially rape and other forms of sexual abuse. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.